Today we're looking at a state that until recently was one of the most popular states for relocation for over 300 years. Yes, way back before we were a country and it was actually a state. And no, we're not talking about California. That's technically only been a state for about 172 years. But we're talking about the Empire State, New York. More and more people are taking a hard pass on the Big Apple and the state that's attached to it. I say it like that because there's this weird thing that people think about New York City and New York State. They don't think they're the same. They don't see it as a city in a state. They see New York City as its own thing, sort of like Washington, D.C. Just in case you're geographically challenged, I'm here to tell you without a doubt, New York City is a city in the state of New York. It's a very, very large city, but it's just a city in a state. The amount of emails I've gotten on that one is just bizarre. I get some pretty weird emails, but every time I get that one, I'm just kind of baffled. I could write a book on strange emails I get. Anyway, while looking at the census data last year, I realized that New York State had a serious problem with its shrinking population. I mean, it's kind of known at this point. Unlike most states, it wasn't people were moving out as much as it were people not choosing to move there anymore. This isn't something that's happened very often in New York State. We are talking about a state that has gained population in all but one census since its most significant city was called New Amsterdam. That census was the 1980 census. The 70s in New York and New York City sucked. Today's video is based on a survey of people who have switched East Coast states in the last 5 years that didn't choose New York, and why. Even though we're talking about New York State, you'll see answers really have a lot to do with New York City. Just makes sense, 83% of the people that moved to New York State really moved to New York City. Got it? Get it? Good. Let's take a look. Number 10, the culture. New York State is a very diverse state. This can be a challenge for people that are not used to a lot of diversity. If you're moving here from, let's say, Alabama or something like that, it might be a little strange for you. And yes, I'm well aware of a lot of you don't think diversity is a good thing. And if that's your mindset, I would suggest never moving to New York State, especially New York City. That little brain of yours might stroke out. If you just look at New York City alone, yeah, their, diversity can be a little bit overwhelming. Drive 5 or 10 blocks in New York City and you're going to see a few different cultural neighborhoods, I guess you could say. And that's what a lot of people put down as to why they didn't want to move there. It was just a little too much for them. And again, this is one of the ones that was probably just focused on New York City, even though other places like Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, those are pretty diverse cities also. Number 9, political climate. Yes, this is a big one, I'm sure, for southern states on the East Coast that didn't want to move to New York State because of the politics. New York State is a very liberal state. I usually avoid this one, but it's a thing. I mean, people kept selecting it, so I gotta mention it. My personal point of view is I don't care how an area votes. I don't care how you vote. I'm gonna move wherever I want, and I'm gonna continue to vote how I want. You should continue to vote how you want. That just makes a healthy democracy. The reason I try and avoid this one is we just get the comment section just filled with people saying their little things about liberals or conservatives or Republicans, whatever. I'm here to tell you, bashing or leaving the catchphrase of the month in the comment section of a YouTube video has never made anyone switch parties. So if you're gonna leave a comment, try and make sure you have a point. But yeah, a lot of people just don't like the politics of New York and they choose to stay away. Number 8, the job market. The job market in New York State is competitive. Again, especially in New York City. I mean, besides the fact they have a ton of people there that are willing to work, a lot of businesses have moved out of state in recent years. So they have fewer people than they used to have, but they have far fewer jobs. I mean, unless you want to work fast food. They got tons of that. I took a tour in New York City years back, and the guy started talking about how expensive it was, and a lot of people will work things like fast food while they do other jobs too. So they're having like 2 or 3 jobs. The guy said, and at night, they don't have much time to do anything but, and I yelled out, cry themselves to sleep. He stopped for a second, all, no. Later on, we got on the subway and he was explaining some tips and tricks about riding the subway. And he said, a lot of people that ride the subway, and I said, cry themselves to sleep? And he just turns around and goes, no, dude, shut up. And just so you know, it didn't end there. I said like 3 other times. But at the end of the tour, he goes, okay, guys, thanks. I'm just going to go home and cry myself to sleep. Then he pointed at me, goes, because of this guy. So the moral of this story is don't hit an Irish pub before you go on a guided tour of New York City. Number 7, the cost of healthcare. The cost of healthcare in New York State is insane. New York State always shows up in the top 10 for the highest cost of healthcare. Depending on the study or survey you look at, they're going to be somewhere between number 7 and number 3. Just so you know, Alaska always takes the top spot. They average about 2,000 to 3,000 more a year than all the other states. One study I saw said that the typical healthcare costs a New York State resident about $9,778 a year. That's just the typical, that's just the average. In Alaska, it's about $11,400 a year. Kind of rough. Number 6, the weather. Now, this one I find kind of strange because, yeah, the weather does vary from state to state, but not that much. If you're in New Jersey, you're getting the same weather as New York. You know, if you're Massachusetts, it's probably a little bit colder than New York sometimes, and sometimes not so much. There isn't much of a difference in the North Atlantic states. So I think a lot of the people that answered that one came from the Southern Atlantic states, you know, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. That being said, New York does get some brutal winters, especially upstate New York. You get around Watertown, Syracuse, it gets pretty rough. Even in the southern part of the state, that can have some pretty rough winters too. Summers are nice and they do get into the 90s, but you know, just like every place else, it's just the winters that really turn people off about this part of the country. If you're not a winter person, I wouldn't suggest moving to New York. Number 5, the high cost of living. New York State has one of the highest costs of living in the United States. There's a lot of things that play into their high cost of living. 2 of them we'll talk about later, which is taxes and housing. But overall, cost of living, daily stuff is expensive in New York State. One of the best ways to look at it is, let's say the average is $100. So if you go into a grocery store, let's say in Nebraska, where everything's average, you buy $100 worth of stuff. In New York State, it would cost almost $120 to get that same stuff. In 2022, $100 worth of gas costs you about $113 in New York State. The only thing they do get a break on, New York State's utilities are a little bit below the national average. If you're in the state that's considered the average and you pay $100 for your utilities, in New York State it's $99. Not much of a break, but it's not above the national average, so that's good. Number 4, crime. Now, since I know the stats, I know this one's a little bit off. Everyone has this idea in their head that New York State is just this dangerous, dangerous place. New York City's got some crime, just like every major city. What most people don't realize is they're focusing on reputation, because the crime rate in New York City is actually 9% lower than the US average. It's more dangerous in Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas than it is in New York City. You have a 1 in 47% chance of being the victim of a crime in New York City. Look at Jacksonville, Florida. Their crime rate's 52% above the national average. Overall, the state's crime rate is 2% lower than the national average. If they could just get rid of Buffalo, it would be a lot better. Buffalo has a crime rate that's 70% above the national average, and it's bringing the rest of the state down. Rochester's no peach either. Their crime rate's 78% above the national average. But I think this one's a little misguided. New York's had its time where it's been extremely dangerous. It's not really that dangerous anymore. Number 3, public transportation. This one obviously was focused on New York City. That's what people had in their mind, I'm sure, when they answered this one. A lot of people don't want to ride the subway. A lot of people come from states where their car is their main mode of transportation. Owning a car in New York City sucks. Now, the rest of the state, it's just like any other state, but owning a car in New York City, again, where most of the people would move to, it's really not a good city for people that want to drive their car. Getting a parking place, paying for a parking place, insurance is through the roof there. Traffic, it sucks. Some people just don't want to ride in the subway or take cabs all the time, I guess. New York City has an excellent public transportation system, but it can get crowded and it can become unreliable at a moment's notice. This can be a challenge for people that are used to having their car. Number 2, the housing market. The housing market in New York State is brutal. Obviously, New York City plays a big part in that, dragging their numbers down. The upstate area, that's not as bad. It usually hovers around 10% above the national average, which isn't terrible. New York City is closer to 250% above the national average. In 2020, New York State was ranked as the 9th highest state for housing. In 2022, they moved all the way up to number 6. It's actually hard to believe that they're doing better than Oregon. But yeah, that one is a little misleading, because New York City is really, raising the numbers on this entire state because they're so high. All right, before we get to number 1, if you're thinking about moving to another state, not just New York, any state, there is a link for Home and Money in the description area below. They can help you get in touch with a real estate agent anywhere in the country. They also have some other things that'll help you with home buying too on their website. Give them a look. All right, on to number 1. And number 1, taxes. Taxes are brutal in New York State. I've seen some study where New Jersey actually had a higher tax burden, but most people agree that it's New York State. WalletHub has them at number 1. WalletHub's a pretty good source when it comes to things like housing prices and taxes. For some reason, everyone seems to think California has the highest taxes in the country. No, they don't. WalletHub has them at number 12. Their total tax burden in California is 8.89%. That's in May of 2023. Again, according to WalletHub. New Jersey, they're not terrible. It's 9.76%. Hawaii being the second highest with 12.31%. And New York State is 12.47%. That's pretty high. Just because people will ask, some of the lowest states, Alaska is the absolute lowest. 5% of their income is their total tax burden. Delaware is 6.12, New Hampshire is 6.14, Tennessee is 6.22, and then everyone always asks, Florida is 6.33%. So if you're leaving New York and moving down to Florida like so many other people are, trying to save money, here's where you're going to save a bunch of money. All right, that's today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you got some information out of it. Don't forget to give the video a big thumbs up, leave a comment, tell me what you thought. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.